Ethan Walker had learned to measure his days in small, predictable units. The time it took to finish his morning coffee, the number of unread emails waiting when he logged in, the quiet walk home beside a woman who no longer asked how his day had been. Life was not unkind to him, just indifferent, and indifference he had discovered could be more exhausting than hardship. At T29, Ethan worked as a project analyst at Bennett and Company, a firm known for precision and restraint. He fit the culture well, reliable, thoughtful, rarely late. His colleagues trusted him, even if they rarely noticed him. He didn't mind. Being unseen had become familiar, almost comforting, except on the nights when the silence followed him home. Olivia Walker had once filled that silence with plans and laughter. They had met years ago, young and hopeful, promising each other futures that felt endless at the time. Now, their apartment was neatly arranged and emotionally hollow. Olivia's attention was always elsewhere: her phone, her social calendar, her ambitions. She spoke often about what she wanted next, but rarely asked Ethan what he needed. When she did speak his name, it sounded more like a habit than an invitation. Ethan told himself this was normal. Long relationships settled into routines. Passion softened into practicality. Still, something uneasy stirred inside him when Olivia forgot his birthday last year, laughing it off as a scheduling mistake. He had smiled then, the way he always did, convincing himself that love didn't require reminders. Work, at least, offered structure. Claire Bennett, the firm's director, embodied everything the company valued: composed, intelligent, impossible to read. She was admired from a distance, spoken about with respect rather than affection. Ethan had worked under her for nearly 2 years, long enough to notice the details others missed. She listened when people spoke, truly listened, as if every sentence carried weight. When she offered feedback, it was precise, never cruel. When she thanked someone, she meant it. Claire was married to Daniel Bennett, a name that carried influence in the city's business circles. Daniel was successful, decisive, and often absent. Ethan knew this only in fragments. Conversations overheard, a remark Claire once made about another late dinner alone. She never complained. Complaints suggested expectation, and Claire Bennett had learned to keep hers carefully managed. Their interactions were professional, measured, and brief, yet Ethan found himself unusually attentive around her. Not because he wanted anything, but because he felt acknowledged. When Claire asked for his opinion in meetings, she waited for his answer. When she assigned him work, she trusted him to complete it without reminders. That quiet confidence unsettled him more than praise ever could. Outside the office, Ethan's life continued its slow, unremarkable rhythm. Olivia talked about moving to a better apartment, about networking dinners he rarely attended. They slept beside each other, sharing space without intimacy. On some evenings, Ethan would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly they had begun living parallel lives. As his birthday approached, Ethan expected nothing. Experience had taught him that expectations were merely rehearsals for disappointment. Olivia mentioned an event she needed to attend that evening, apologizing in advance for being busy. Ethan told her it was fine and meant it, or at least wanted to work. However, something unexpected happened. A simple email circulated among the team, wishing him well. There was a small cake in the break room, a few awkward claps, a paper cup of coffee raised in quiet celebration. Ethan thanked everyone, embarrassed by the attention, touched by its sincerity. It was more acknowledgement than he had anticipated, and it lingered with him long after the cake was gone. Later that afternoon, Claire asked him to step into her office. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were warm. She wished him a happy birthday, offering a brief smile that felt surprisingly personal. She thanked him for his consistency, for the way he carried responsibility without complaint. Ethan felt a strange tightness in his chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately name. When he left her office, he realized something had shifted, though nothing tangible had changed. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition, the kind that reached beneath the surface and settled somewhere deep and unsettling. That evening, Ethan returned home to an empty apartment. Olivia texted to say she'd be late, followed by a casual apology. He ate dinner alone, the city lights flickering outside the window. He thought about the way Claire had looked at him earlier, attentive and calm, and then about the silence that greeted him now, that he reminded himself that attention did not equal affection, that kindness did not imply possibility. Yet for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt the quiet pull of a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask before. What did it mean to be chosen, even briefly, even innocently? As the night settled around him, Ethan sensed that his life, so carefully balanced on routine and restraint, was approaching a moment of disruption. He didn't know how or when it would arrive, only that something within him had begun to awaken, and once awakened, it would not easily return to sleep.
The days following the revelation felt like walking through fog for Emma Carter. Each movement in her house, once comfortable and familiar, now carried the weight of absence and betrayal. Lucas had moved out temporarily, leaving behind only a hollow echo of the life they had shared, while Sophie had ceased all contact, their friendship evaporating as if it had never existed. Emma's emotions were a tempest of grief, anger, and disbelief, but beneath the chaos, a quiet spark of resolve began to grow. She understood that the path to healing would be neither instant nor painless, but it was hers to take. Emma started by reclaiming her space. The bedroom, once shared with Lucas, became her sanctuary. She carefully packed away items that held too many memories, photographs, gifts, mementos, placing them in boxes to be stored away. Each item she removed was a symbolic act, a physical representation of letting go. Her hands trembled as she handled familiar objects, but with every box she closed, the weight on her chest seemed to lighten, ever so slightly. She allowed herself to feel the hurt fully, acknowledging that grief was a necessary step toward liberation. In her solitude, Emma found herself turning to old habits that had long been neglected. She dusted off her journal, filling pages with reflections, anger, and tentative hopes for the future. Words became her therapy, a conduit to channel the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She revisited hobbies she had abandoned, painting small canvases, tending to the garden, even running through the neighborhood she once shared with Lucas. These activities reminded her of her own identity, separate from the betrayals that had threatened to define her life. Ethan, her trusted confidant, became a steady presence during this time. He respected her space while offering support, occasionally checking in with messages of encouragement. One evening, they met at a quiet cafe, the kind with soft lighting and comfortable silence. Ethan listened without judgment as Emma spoke of her heartbreak, her voice tinged with both sorrow and emerging strength. "You're allowed to feel everything, Emma," he said gently. "But don't let what they did dictate who you are. You are stronger than their betrayal." His words resonated with her, planting seeds of courage that would slowly blossom into action. Emma realized that reclaiming her life also meant setting boundaries. She ceased communication with Lucas beyond practical matters and cut all ties with Sophie, refusing to allow toxic influences to linger. She informed herself about her options, researched her rights, and spoke to a lawyer to understand the steps needed to ensure her independence and security. Though difficult, these actions empowered her, transforming her from a passive victim into an active agent of her own future. She began to see that strength wasn't the absence of hurt, it was acting in spite of it. With time, Emma allowed herself to step back into the world outside her home. She met friends for coffee, reconnected with colleagues, and attended local art workshops she had once enjoyed but neglected during her marriage. Each interaction was a small victory, a reminder that her life had dimensions beyond the betrayal she endured. She discovered joy in simple moments, the laughter of strangers, the smell of freshly baked bread, the crisp air of an early morning run. These experiences, though minor, stitched together the frayed edges of her spirit. One afternoon, Emma revisited a small park where she had often walked with Lucas. She sat on a bench under the sprawling branches of an oak tree, watching children play and couples stroll by. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm. The memories of betrayal were still present, sharp and raw, but they no longer held dominion over her. She reflected on the lessons learned. Trust, while precious, must be paired with discernment. Love, while profound, does not justify enduring harm, and above all, one's own worth is non-negotiable. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Emma began to plan new goals, a small solo trip she had postponed for years, enrolling in a painting class she had always admired, and dedicating time to her career aspirations. Each step was intentional, a reclaiming of time and energy once consumed by heartbreak. She celebrated small victories privately, allowing herself quiet pride in the resilience she was cultivating. Every act of self-care, every decision made independently, became a brick in the foundation of her renewed life. Emma's reflection in the mirror one morning startled her. She looked at a woman who had been broken, yes, but who also bore the marks of resilience and self-discovery. Her eyes, once clouded with uncertainty, now held clarity and a quiet fierceness. She recognized that she had endured betrayal not because she lacked judgment, but because she had loved fully. That same capacity for love, she realized, could now be channeled toward herself, toward authentic relationships that honored her worth. The final closure came unexpectedly. A small envelope arrived in the mail, a letter from Lucas attempting an apology. Emma read it once, her expression neutral, then set it aside without reply. She understood that closure did not require their acknowledgement, only her acceptance of the past and commitment to the future. Sophie's messages, now unopened and ignored, had no power over her. Emma had reclaimed her narrative. She would write the next chapter herself. As evening fell, Emma sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel both the sorrow of what had been lost and the thrill of what was still possible. The house was quiet, but in that stillness, she discovered a profound sense of peace. Betrayal had tested her, but it had not broken her. Instead, it had illuminated her strength, her resilience, and the unshakable truth that she was enough on her own. Emma placed a small, framed photograph of herself on the windowsill, a symbol of self-love and renewal. The house no longer felt heavy with memories of deceit but light with the possibility of new beginnings. She had faced the darkness, navigated heartbreak, and emerged with a clearer vision of herself and her future. And as she sipped her tea, a soft smile touching her lips, she understood that the life ahead would be shaped not by betrayal but by her courage, her choices, and the unwavering belief in her own worth.
Ethan Walker began to recognize the change not in grand gestures, but in the quiet habits that reshaped his days. He woke earlier, checking his phone before his feet touched the floor. He lingered at work longer than necessary, telling himself it was dedication, not desire. Each justification felt reasonable on its own, yet together they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. Claire Bennett mirrored that restraint with practiced precision. In meetings, she remained composed, addressing Ethan no differently than anyone else. Yet when the room emptied, she sometimes paused beside his desk, asking a question she already knew the answer to, simply to hear him speak. Their conversations carried a careful intimacy, balanced on pauses and half-finished sentences like the tea home. Olivia Walker sensed the shift before she understood it. Ethan listened less, his attention fractured. When she spoke about her day, he responded politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. One evening, she asked him directly if something was wrong. Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. Just tired, he said. The lie tasted thin, but Olivia accepted it. Relieved to avoid a conversation neither of them seemed eager to have, Claire, too, was living with unease. Daniel Bennett continued his routine of late nights and distant conversations. When he was present, his focus remained fixed on his phone or the next obligation. Claire found herself measuring time differently, counting not hours but moments. Those brief exchanges with Ethan that felt unexpectedly vivid. She told herself it was temporary, a response to neglect, not a reflection of her character. A scheduled business trip forced a shift they could no longer control. Ethan and Claire were assigned to present together, a practical decision that made sense on paper. The journey was efficient, professional, and outwardly uneventful. Still, the shared flights, the long discussions over preparation notes, created a closeness neither could pretend was accidental in the quiet of a hotel conference room. Claire spoke candidly about leadership fatigue, about the pressure of being admired yet unseen. Ethan listened, offering understanding without solutions. When he spoke of his own life, he avoided names, describing a relationship sustained more by history than affection. Claire did not press for details. She didn't need them. That night, alone in their separate rooms, both lay awake. The distance between their doors felt symbolic rather than physical, a boundary held together by willpower alone. Ethan stared at the ceiling, aware that he was thinking of Claire in a way that left no room for innocence. He felt ashamed, yet also undeniably alive. Upon returning home, the contrast was sharp. Olivia greeted him with distracted warmth, more curious about her own plans than his trip. Ethan answered politely, feeling like a guest in his own life. The silence between them grew heavier, filled with words neither seemed willing to speak. Mason Reed noticed the strain during a quiet lunch. Ethan was distracted, responding slowly, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Mason studied him with concern. "You're carrying something," he said. "Just make sure it doesn't carry you somewhere you can't come back from." Ethan forced a smile, dismissing the warning, though it echoed uncomfortably close to his own fears. AT work. Claire requested fewer meetings, sensing the danger of proximity. Yet the absence only heightened the awareness between them. Emails became more thoughtful, each message carefully composed, each response anticipated. When they did speak, it was with a restraint that felt like tension drawn tight. One afternoon, Claire finally addressed what lingered between them. She didn't name it directly. She spoke, instead of boundaries, of responsibility. Ethan listened, understanding that she was speaking as much to herself as to him. He agreed, promising nothing he wasn't sure he could keep. The promise held for days, then faltered under the weight of honesty. During a late meeting, Claire admitted that she felt seen with him in a way she hadn't in years. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant. Ethan did not reply immediately. When he did, he spoke the truth he had been avoiding, that he felt the same. The acknowledgement changed everything. They did not touch. They did not confess love. Yet the emotional line, once blurred, was now unmistakably crossed. Both felt it, sharp and undeniable. Guilt followed swiftly. Ethan found himself watching Olivia with new eyes, recognizing her distance, but also his own complicity. Claire avoided Daniel's gaze, aware that her silence carried meaning. Each carried the weight of choices not yet made, consequences not yet realized. In the days that followed, they pulled back, communicating only when necessary. The restraint was deliberate, painful. Ethan tried to reinvest himself at home, offering attention Olivia seemed surprised to receive. Claire focused on work, burying herself in tasks that left little room for reflection. Yet absence did not erase what had been acknowledged. It only clarified it. One evening, as Ethan prepared to leave the office, Claire approached him. There was no tension in her voice, only resolve. She thanked him for his professionalism and wished him a good night. As she turned away, Ethan understood that this was not an ending, but a pause. One charged with decisions yet to be made. He stepped into the night air, aware that the balance he had tried to maintain was slipping. The question Claire had once asked in jest now pressed against his thoughts with relentless seriousness. What if the answer changed everything? And more importantly, what would it cost to discover it? The pause Claire Bennett had created did not bring relief. It sharpened everything that followed. Ethan Walker tried to return to the life he had known, but familiarity now felt like resistance rather than comfort. At home, he made a conscious effort to be present. He asked Olivia Walker about her day and listened without interruption. He cooked dinner, suggested a walk, even proposed planning something together. Olivia seemed pleasantly surprised, yet slightly wary, as if his attention were an unfamiliar language. For a few days, it almost worked. Routine tried to reassert itself, but the quiet between them was no longer neutral. It was weighted with what had gone unsaid. One evening, Olivia studied Ethan across the table and asked, carefully, whether there was someone else. The question was calm, not accusatory, and that calmness made it impossible to evade. Ethan answered honestly, though not completely. He told her there was no affair, no betrayal she could point to. He told her, instead, that he felt lonely, unseen, and unsure when that had begun. Olivia listened, her expression tightening not with anger, but recognition. She admitted, in turn, that she had taken his steadiness for granted, mistaking reliability for permanence. They talked longer than they had in years, laying out disappointments like evidence neither could dispute. By the end of the conversation, the truth was clear without being spoken aloud. They cared for each other, but care was no longer enough. When Olivia suggested time apart, her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. Ethan agreed, feeling both grief and relief settle at once. Claire faced a reckoning soon after. Daniel Bennett returned late one night, distracted and distant as always. Claire watched him move through their shared space like a visitor, and the realization arrived without drama. She told him she felt alone in their marriage. Daniel responded with surprise, then defensiveness, promising effort without offering understanding. Claire recognized the pattern immediately. This was not a moment of change, it was repetition. The conversation ended quietly, with no raised voices and no clear resolution. But something fundamental shifted. Claire understood that silence had been a choice she no longer wished to make. Days passed. Ethan and Claire maintained distance, communicating only when necessary, their professionalism intact. The restraint was no longer about fear of crossing a line. It was about respect for the consequences already unfolding. Each was disentangling from a life built on habit rather than intention. When they finally spoke again, it was brief and deliberate. Claire informed Ethan that she would be taking personal leave. Ethan wished her well, meaning more than the words conveyed. There was no confession, no promise. They both understood that timing mattered as much as feeling. Time did its quiet work. Ethan moved into a smaller apartment, learning the contours of independence again. He reconnected with Mason Reed, who listened without judgment and reminded him that clarity often followed loss. Ethan missed Olivia in unexpected moments, but he did not regret the honesty that had ended their pretense. Claire used her leave to step back from the life she had managed so efficiently. She confronted the emptiness she had long minimized and the expectations she had outgrown. When she returned to work, there was a calm decisiveness in her manner that felt earned rather than imposed. Their reunion was unplanned. They ran into each other one evening outside the office building, both heading home, both momentarily unsure how to proceed. They exchanged pleasantries, then paused, recognizing the symmetry of the moment. This time, there was no tension, only clarity. They spoke openly, without urgency. They acknowledged what had drawn them together and what had nearly undone them. Claire admitted that the joke had startled her because it had touched a truth she had been avoiding. Ethan confessed that her question had forced him to confront how little he had been asking of his own life. Neither proposed anything beyond conversation. They walked together for a while, sharing observations about the city, about work, about the strange relief of choosing honesty even when it disrupted comfort. When they parted, it was with a mutual understanding rather than expectation. Weeks later, as Ethan prepared to leave the office on a quiet evening, Claire stopped by his desk. Her expression was warm, composed, familiar in a new way. She thanked him for his work and for his integrity. Then, with a small, deliberate smile, she added that she had been thinking about his question. This time, there was no joke in her tone. Ethan met her gaze, aware of the history behind them and the uncertainty ahead. He did not answer immediately. Some questions, he had learned, deserved patience. As they stepped into the fading light of the evening, the future remained undefined, shaped not by impulse but by choice. And that, more than any answer, felt like the beginning of something real.